Welcome to It's Not What You Think with Mordy Levine, where we get to meet and talk to spiritual teachers from around the world. Our guests are from all walks of life, and we hear about how they got into spirituality and how they navigate the world we all live in. This is episode 9, recorded on April 29th, 2021. My guest today is Rabbi Adam Kligfeld. Rabbi Kligfeld is a graduate of Columbia College. He was ordained as a rabbi in 2000 by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. Since then, he has served communities in Monroe, New York, and in LA, and is currently the senior rabbi at Temple Beth Am in Los Angeles since 2009. In 2017, Rabbi Kligfeld took a sabbatical to study Hasidic texts, but instead of going to Israel, he went to a Tibetan Buddhist center on a remote island off the coast of Scotland, which of course makes total sense. And then at some point studied yoga and meditation with a Hindu teacher in India. What a fascinating journey. We talk about his experience, what he learned during that time, and what he was able to bring back to enrich his Judaism and his Jewish community. It's Not What You Think podcast is available on all streaming platforms, so please like, comment, share, or subscribe on your favorite platform. That support is enough to continue to allow us to produce this show. Our interviews are with people who may have opinions different from yours or mine. So while we keep an open mind, just remember, it's not what you think. Welcome, Rabbi Adam Kligfeld, to It's Not What You Think. I do the intro and the outro after the podcast, so we're just going to jump in. How are you? How was your week? That's better. Now we're back on schedule. Sorry.
Week is going great. Intense. We're all still living in a intense mode. There's emergency and trauma hovering, I sense, national and societal and cultural, and also individual and familial. So on some sense, our synagogue and school campus looks normal-ish with kids back to school and playing basketball and learning in open air pods. And there's also a sense of just heaviness hovering that is almost palpable. So
yeah,
I found myself
the word hovering is so applicable.
Yeah.
I would venture to say that it's really been going on for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But it just gets more and more intense, with all the politics and all that. And hey, God says, hey, let's throw them a pandemic. Let's see how they handle that.
Yeah.
California seems to be doing better with the whole thing. I'm just wondering if, even though we're on Zoom, maybe you and I should both be wearing masks anyways. You know about Mari Sion, right?
Yes.
We don't want people to think we're in the same room. We're not wearing masks. So
anyways. We actually have that very question when we have our services on Shabbat morning. Sometimes we have 2 or 3 clergy in the sanctuary, separated by about 40 feet away, but on the same audio feed and with a split screen. So we're presenting to the congregation at home as if we're together, so our voices can meld, and our faces look like they're near each other, but they're not near each other. And we do wonder, should we be wearing masks to suggest that we're being extra careful, or is that inane? We should actually be modeling that this is safe to do exactly what we're doing, and there's no reason to be overly restrictive.
Well, if people thought that, I'm sure you would be bombarded with emails by now. So I think you're okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thanks for joining me. So, do you remember the very first time that you tried to meditate?
I remember more clearly all the times I chose not to meditate when it was offered to me as an extracurricular activity and my mind and soul and spirit were not yet at the place where I would say, yes, that's for me. I grew up both with music and closing your eyes kind of spirituality to be a significant part of my religious life, but also, I can kind of translate this term for some of your listeners, a bit of a litvak, where spiritual life was starting on page 1 of their prayer book and it ended when you finished that particular prayer service. It was about fluidity and comprehensiveness in articulating the prayers, but also with a sense of spirit, the Hebrew word ruach. And for me, I didn't feel like I was lacking anything, or that my spiritual life was lacking anything, such that when I came to Jewish settings or rabbinic conferences and there was an alternate meditation service offered half an hour before traditional services, I was not a place where I said, yes, that's for me. And I think that was a significant thing for the first couple of years, if not more than a decade of my career. I would say about I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7. I don't know exactly when it was. Something shifted, and I can't even tell what it shifted. All I can tell is that I was at a conference, and there was a optional meditation experience with some yoga, and something in my brain said, "Why not? Try it." Right? It won't hurt. It won't
It
violate.
won't. Right.
Right? Maybe
That was the big plus. This can't hurt me.
right. Maybe it stemmed from a place of a certain dead zone in my own prayer life, right?
Mm-hmm.
We go through zones of being deadened and alive in our relational life, in our love life, and in our prayer life, right? So I was saying the prayers, but it wasn't humming in my spirit on the level that it once had before. And so I remember one particular version of that meditative experience at a retreat center in the Baltimore area. And it was lovely and it was calming and it wasn't overly foreign. And in fact, my mind, I was both observing my mind clear itself and also observing my mind working triply hard, already trying to imagine the connections, the tethers between that experience and my own traditional prayer life. So I was violating meditation while I was meditating because I was planning and I was programming and I was thinking about how I'm going to write this up.
Yeah. I've never heard that before, by the way, of people. So that's new to me. But no, that's wonderful. I ask that question a lot, as you know, that's kind of the core of the podcast, although who knows where we'll end up in the conversation. And, I get things like one spiritual teacher, when he was 6, 7 years old, he felt this incredible silence and saw the light in the sunlight, and he just kind of went to another world. And I was like, wow. And I've heard that from other people. And my experience was just the opposite. I had no interest in it. But I met a guy in graduate school who said to me, hey, just had met him 10 minutes. He goes, hey, do you want to be in my karate club? I said, really? I said, how much is it? Because I was, financially had deficits. And he said, oh, it's free. I said, it's free, great. And to my mind, I'm from Brooklyn. I don't know if you knew that. And I figured, karate, not going to be a problem. And I go there, and it's a very traditional Japanese karate, long lineage, thousands of years. And we're sitting on our knees for like 2 or 3 minutes before we start. And I'm like, I don't like this, because I'm very judgmental, of course. I don't like this. This is not good. And then we're 10 or 15 minutes into the, learning the techniques, and I'm exhausted. Mm. And I'm thinking like, this is a bad idea. The mind starts going, it's a bad idea. I'm not coming back, blah, 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 blah. When the class was done, of course, we sat on our knees again to meditate. About an hour later, I realized that, wow, I couldn't believe how it was. It's really meditation in motion, which you can do just walking. You don't need karate. So I didn't have the experience. I had the same experience. Yeah, I didn't. Who needs that? Meditation?
Yeah.
So then what was the next step for you?
I started saying yes to these optional experiences and reaching into meditation, into yoga, into small bursts of mindfulness moments, not a practice, but moments, and realizing that I felt ennobled by it, I felt calmed by it, and I felt that it was reawakening certain spiritual seeds in my system that had been somnolent for too long. And then by some coincidence, I had a professional sabbatical coming up. I'm blessed to be in a congregation that understands the beauty and also the burden of rabbinic leadership and gives rabbis some regular sabbatical. So I had a 6-month sabbatical that started about 4 years ago. I remember thinking to myself, there are several ways that a rabbi can do sabbatical. Most of my friends, the way they had done sabbaticals, and they loved them, were that they picked them and their families up. They moved to a very Anglo neighborhood in the southern part of Jerusalem. They lived in an apartment. They ate falafel. They studied at the Hartman Institute, which is a great center for Torah study in Jerusalem. And they loved every minute of it.
Right.
Doing an intense version of the stuff they did all the time. And then they returned and their sabbatical was over and it had never happened. And I had a sense that I wanted to do a version of a sabbatical that would stretch me, that would expose me to ideas, experiences, forms, vocabulary that were new to me, that could potentially enrich my own Jewish and rabbinic practice, and that would have legs, that a week after my sabbatical, there would be remnants, obvious remnants of it, not just that I was rested, but that I had grown. So I started to think about different options. To make a long story short, I chose 3 pillars of the sabbatical experience I wanted to have. One, I failed at miserably, and that was learning how to play the guitar. I'm a very musical person. I love to sing and harmonize. I have a very good ear. I'm not a musical instrumentalist. I played clarinet as a kid, but poorly. And I thought, I should be the one who doesn't have to like hire someone to bring the guitar to the campfire. I should be the campfire guy. And I misunderstood how hard it is to teach your fingers to do this, with great rapidity and intentionality to produce a D chord. I failed miserably. The other 2 pillars of my sabbatical.
Can I make you just didn't meet your expectations.
Yes.
There's a difference. Okay.
Right. I successfully showed that way of learning guitar was not the right method. It was
that too. Okay.
Right. At that age. The other 2 pillars were I wanted to study mysticism, particularly Hasidic mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
I have compendia on my bookshelf I can pull off, and I can quote an individual Hasidic rabbi from the 18th century on a verse, but I wanted to understand something deeper about the methodology of how the Hasidic revolution, and it was a revolution then, it's kind of gotten to be undifferentiated ultra-Orthodoxy now, but when it began, it was a profound spiritual revolution against a slumbering Eastern European Judaism. Right. And I wanted to understand more about how they tried to bring mysticism back into the Jewish experience. And I wanted to study mindfulness and meditation from beyond the Jewish community. And to make another very long and interesting story short, we can get back to it. By total coincidence, I found we're going to be based in the UK for this sabbatical,
okay.
Living mostly in Oxford. And there was a particular week on the calendar that through lots of weird family logistics, my wife was going to be back in the States collecting my kids from camp. They were going to come back to the UK, and I had a week to play with. I had a week to find a retreat. And I found, not knowing what I was looking for,
right,
a place called the Holy Isle, which is a tiny island, which itself is off of an island, which itself is off of the southwestern coast of Scotland. And the isle is owned and managed by an order of Tibetan Buddhists. On the southern part of the isle, there is sort of a monastery where nuns and monks are in silent retreats. And in the northern part of the isle, there's a retreat center that is operated by this order, connected to the Sammy Ling Monastery in Scotland,
sure,
but opens itself up to all these different week or half-week long retreats that are not specifically focused on Buddhism per se, but are inspired and hosted by this Buddhist order. And it was the exact right dates. It was
so that was really the key.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know what they're doing there, but the dates work for me.
The picture was beautiful. It was the exact right date. It was meditation and qigong. So I was interested in this meditative body posture because I thought that maybe that could relate to the use of the body in prayer. And I went on a wing and a prayer, and it changed my life. It radically changed my life. I was able to become an apprentice to some really wonderful teachers who I'm still mimicking and adapting and in relationship with. And I had a profound experience that was the starting point of this deeper exploration rather than a sporadic exploration. At the end of that sabbatical, I went to India for a week because I wanted to explore, not that I had by any means learned comprehensively the Tibetan Buddhist approach to meditation, but I had dipped my toes, feet, ankles into it. I wanted to explore it from a different spiritual and cultural tradition. I wanted to do it from the yogi-based, from the Hindi-based, from the Indian subcontinent. And I had a profound, very different experience with a meditation instructor and yoga instructor in Goa, India. Mm-hmm. And in between, while I was in sabbatical, I sought local communities in Oxford, England, that were doing different forms of meditation, trying to just open up my pores, soak in as much as possible with a stance of curiosity without trying to overly analyze it and assess it, just feel it go through me so that at the end of the experience, I could say to myself, how am I a different human being? How am I a different Jew? How am I a different spiritual person? And how can I be a different rabbi to my community that wasn't on that journey with me, but might be beneficiaries of the droplets of stuff that I could bring back to the community? And it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's not everyone's bag. There are plenty of members of my community who are where I was 10 years ago, which is, oh, that's happening in that room. I'll choose the other room. But there's a lot of moments in our formal and informal spiritual life in the synagogue that are now enriched by meditation or at least mindfulness adjacent.
It's a beautiful. I remember reading about your story in I forget which magazine, but it was amazing to me. So, it's like, okay, I can study Hasidism in Jerusalem, or I can go to Scotland. Jerusalem, Scotland. I don't know. What's God going to think at the end of the day? Okay, Scotland. The time is right.
The beer is much better in Scotland.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So, it's interesting. And then yeah, Buddhism, a little Hinduism, throw that in there with the yoga. So on a day-to-day or a moment by moment, what did it feel like studying, Judaica in a Buddhist environment, in a Hindu environment? I mean, in
Yeah.
India, that's clearly the country is all about that Eastern philosophy. How did that feel? Did you feel any conflict? Did you feel like, oh, this is a perfect match? Were you a little nervous about that?
Those are great questions. I don't think I was nervous. I was curious. I was I would have been nervous at a different stage of my life. I primed the pump to say, go be curious. Go open the apertures and see what flows in. It sort of felt like a kaleidoscope with it constantly shifting, and there wasn't a clear picture emerging at every given moment, but the colors were splendiferous. And I had a couple of moments of like dissonance, but not conflict. I'll share one because it's to me it's such it was a beautiful moment and a beautiful story. When I went to the first one on the Holy Isle, listen, I've been trained by my tradition and my parents to be a gracious guest, right? If you're going into someone else's territory, there's even a rabbinic phrase, right? Minhag hamakom, that the culture of the place, you have to be honoring of it. Of course, if I go to another person's ritual or religious or cultural milieu, I honor it, right? So I knew I was going to this retreat center for a week, and I had no interest of imposing my traditional observant Judaism upon them, but I wanted to ask what was possible without being an intrusion. So I said to them, I'm going to be with you for a week. When the sun goes down on Friday, I'll be observing my Jewish Sabbath. There's I can participate in pretty much all the activities, but is there a place where I can light candles and just have a cup of fruit juice so I can say a blessing off to the side? And I didn't even know if it was respectful to ask, but I tried to ask respectfully.
Of course.
The response was gorgeous. It was not only yes, it was, are you willing to do this in the center of our peace hall and kind of curate the experience for all the people who are there so we can share in your spiritual moment? I was blown away with that spiritual generosity. So I went as a participant, and here I was on Friday. I got to the Holy Isle. I got there a day late because there was a storm, and on the little whiteboard announcing what's happening, meditation, walk, nature walk, Friday afternoon, Sabbath service with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld. Like, this was not in the brochure.
Right.
So here I was in Peace Hall on the Holy Isle, describing what we'd call in Hebrew Seder Shabbat, right? What do we mean when we say the blessing of the grape juice? Why would I bless my wife and the blessing of my children? I actually got emotional about it because, things that you do routinely become rote. So having to be the dramaturg for this scene allowed me to experience my own rhythms of Sabbath with more intentionality. I could see that people were really moved by it. I told the nun, the Buddhist nun who was running the operation, I had to explain to her some of the intricacies of Jewish law, which is that I've lit the candles. I can't blow them out because a Jew cannot blow out the candles. What you do with them is up to you. Like, I know people don't want to leave lit candles in a wooden room unattended. I'm just, when my service is over, I'm going to leave, and what you do with them is up to you.
Right. Wink, wink.
Great. The next morning, she was so touched to tell me that she had blown out the candles and she had transferred them to a shrine on the island where more religious Buddhist ceremonies would take place, right? The retreat was ecumenical, but there was also a more religious Buddhist shrine.
Sure.
And she had added the Sabbath candles to the votive candles were there and lit them. From her perspective, she was honoring my spiritual ritual by adding them. From a persnickety Jewish legal perspective,
Oh yeah, let's go
that
there.
was prohibited. I was like by accident contributing to another religious tradition's rituals. So it was dissonant. I was so moved by the emotional generosity and trying to figure out as a rabbi, a pretty traditional rabbi, how I should feel about having my Sabbath candles added to a Buddhist votive shrine. And I was so moved by that since that moment, there are a few lines in my own daily practice of liturgy that I do not recite because I feel like they would be an insult retroactively to the generosity of this woman, this nun, and what she represented. Because there are lines in a prayer called the Aleinu,
Sure.
where Jews rhapsodize about a future where all will identify the one God of the Jewish people as the God and bow down and show obeisance. And I've said that prayer for forever and ever. And I was thinking to myself, what chutzpah that I expect? Do I expect that nun to convert to my spiritual tradition? Look how open she was to bringing some of my spiritual tradition closer to hers. So it brought me to a place of dissonance, but not a painful one, just an interesting one.
How am I going to put these two experiences together?
Yeah.
My personal experience, my teachings, my education, my beliefs, and then I just had this other experience that's just like, so you came up with a solution that works for you. I want to go back a little bit to the word that you used before about being curious. So when you set your motivation for you said, hey, I'm going to turn on my curiosity sensors. What's interesting about that is a lot of Buddhism deals with fear. We always look and say, hey, a lot of these issues that people may have, anger, stress, irritation, annoyance, really comes down to fear. Fear of not being able to support my self of identity. We don't have to get into it too deeply. But so I interviewed a gentleman who teaches rock climbers, world-renowned rock climbers, how to get over their fears. And in some ways, he's a spiritual teacher, so I had him on the show. And he talks about, two things about fear. One is you try to put your toe in the water incrementally, do these things incrementally. You don't go on the hardest route possible and try to get to the top and go from 0 to 1,000. It goes a little piece at a time, number one. Number two is in your mind, instead of setting yourself a goal, I'm going to get to the top, you just be curious. You be curious. You try to reset yourself. I'm just going to be curious about what this next feel looks like. So you're replacing a fearful attitude. Oh, will they like me? Will I get along? I don't know. Is this right? You can ask all those. The mind can go through that whole routine, which we all do, hopefully less and less for meditation. Or you can just say, I'm going to be curious about what happens, meaning I'm going to be open-minded. I'm going to be process-oriented as opposed to goal-oriented. So I love it when people use that word curious because that means I'm going to go. And curious can also mean I'm making the wrong move. I could get hurt. This could be a really bad thing here, but that's okay. We're going to have an experience and we're going to be curious about it. So the second thing that occurred to me was, when I was a practicing Jew, and I don't know if I shared this with you, when we looked at Christianity, that was just so far away from Judaism. It was like, blue and purple, nothing to do with each other. And then as I started practicing Buddhism, I kind of looked at Judaism and Christianity as so far away from what I was doing as a practicing Buddhist. And now that I've been practicing for 40 plus years, I realize that on the level of people to people and being kind and respectful, that it's nothing to do with religion. I mean, it has to do with religion. There's different roads to the top of the mountain being respect and kindness. And I think you kind of bridge that gap there by meeting people who had some foreign culture, in a foreign land. You traveled thousands of miles. So I love hearing stories like that. That to me is very inspiring and in humanity, really.
Yeah, so I have a couple of responses to that. First of all, I think we're living through an era, sadly, of pathological incuriosity. People are very curious about reinforcing what they already know. They're very curious about sitting with people that agree with them. They're pathologically incurious, and I think from a place of fear of exposing themselves to another idea, whether it's a
Right.
political idea or religious experience. Listen, just today, we're not planning on talking about this because this thing just happened today. Our synagogue was asked by a local Muslim community with whom we've done partnerships if they could use our sanctuary as a place to film their call to prayer digitally that they were going to do as part of an iftar, a kind of an ecumenical iftar experience to end one of the fasts of Ramadan. And I thought, how beautiful. They actually specifically want to take their Muslim call to prayer and bring it into a non-Muslim space as a way of sharing that. And I said yes. And I actually wasn't on the event. It was 2 nights ago. And I've gotten a slew of emails from members of my community saying, what is going on? I turned on the Zoom and we have Muslims in our sanctuary praying. Like someone asked, what's next? A Christmas tree on the sanctuary? So I actually get their peak because I didn't do a good enough job of just explaining what's going on and our rationale. And it is a little bit shocking to have, because we love and we pray in concentric circles and we are used to what we're used to. It is a little bit surprising or shocking when another religious form comes meandering into your religious space, right? But it also, I think, bespeaks an incuriosity on the part of some of the members of our community who were, instead of their first reaction being, oh, isn't that interesting? I wonder what I can learn from this. It was, how dare you intrude upon my space? Now, some of that, how dare you intrude upon my space, is logical in this, at least in the way society is set up, and that doesn't mean that society is set up in a good way, right? Like, if someone that we're not expecting comes into our house, they're still a human being. We say, how what are you doing in my house? This house is for me and my family, right? This house is not for every homeless person within a mile's radius, even though they're a human being, and even though respect and kindness and our sense of all being created in the image of God says they deserve a house as much as I do. I wouldn't want them in my living room in the middle of the night without permission, right? And I think we pray that way as well, that if we're going to organize into religions, and if religions are going to suborganize into sects, and sects are going to suborganize into individual communities, which is just the way of the world right now, it makes sense that we're going to protect our sanctuary and our buildings and have it be primarily, or at least, in a large way, focused on us, our type, our community. And yet, I think we are not sufficiently open to the others out there, and we over other the others, and that ends up making our God concept, I think, smaller, not bigger. And I am sensitive, even as a very traditional Jew, to expressions of Judaism that think they are being done in the name of aggrandizing God, but it's actually limiting God. It's limiting God to say that the 450 square feet of our lectern is only for this prayer in this language, and that another seeker could not have a spiritual experience there. I think that's a limiting of the divine, not an
Right.
expanding of the divine.
So yeah, no, I hear you, and I agree with that. But I want to focus, not focus, but I want to mention that to me the issue is really, I think, like you alluded to, preparation. Our mindset is, this is mine, me, mine's my religion, my lectern, my this, my that. But if you talk to me and you say, look, you see that guy over there? He doesn't have any food. I know that's your food, but wouldn't it, you have that kind of conversation? I think 99.9% of people in this country, regardless of red, blue, green, yellow, whatever they are, will say, sure, we have to take care of that person. Absolutely. Democrat, Republican, you name your religion. Because at the end of the day, I believe we all respond to that. We all respond to kindness, respect. Let's help people. We see that all the time. God knows there's a million crises running around the world, and people are $20 on the GoFundMe page helping. So I think to me that's really the takeaway is, hey, this is a great idea, but we need to sell it better, or we need to explain it better.
Right. And we also have to, I think, redeem the spiritual and we have to include in their spiritual and religious experience some of those base qualities of kindness and respect and essential humanity, and somehow redeem it or elevate it from what can be misconstrued as banalities, because if we also convert the spiritual experience just into be kind and be nice, which of course is sort of what it's about, but it's so hackneyed, it's so, to use a Yiddish term, parav, right? That it loses some of, I think, the intensity and the specificity, and it's that specificity that is indeed different from religion to religion. There's a metaphor that I love thinking about that I learned from a colleague who learned from a Christian colleague of his when he was a rabbi in Minnesota. So this is, 2 steps removed. He was saying, I forgot what denomination of Christianity he represented. I don't know if it was Lutheran or Episcopalian, but he was saying, let's think of the divine spirit or the religious experience in the following way: of an enormous blaring light whose intensity can't even be fathomed. That's over there. In between us and that light is a sheet, and the sheet has millions of perforations. But mostly what you look at when you look at the sheet from a distance is the whiteness of the sheet. You have a sense that there's a blazing light behind it, but you can't access it. The only way to really be shown the full glory of the light is to put your eyes up to one of the tiny, very small perforations. And through that, you see the splendor. But if you pull back and just appreciate that there are lots of holes, then you know that there are lots of holes there, but you're not getting any of the light. He would say that, to me, is the religious experience, that we can look back and say there are an enormous number of openings to that splendor on the side. But the best way to experience it is to be curious about many of them, but to commit to one of those holes, right? And to live your life through the particular expectations and specificities and commitments and binding nature of one of them. And for one person, it might be modern American conservative Judaism. For one person, it might be Tibetan Buddhism. For one person, it might be Sufi Islam. And we can all appreciate that, hey, I have a friend over there who's looking through a different hole, and he's also having an amazing experience. But I'm going to learn from his experience, but I'm going to stick to mine, because I'm going to stick to my family too, right? The fact that you love your wife and I love my wife doesn't mean that I should love your wife the way you do. It means that I should recommit to the notion of loving my own wife.
Right. So you remind me, my father, who Rabbi Mordy Levine, was a rabbi still alive, 93 years old in Connecticut, was a rabbi in Brooklyn and Massachusetts, a Jewish Theological Seminary graduate as well. I think he graduated in 1743, by the way. Anyway, so in the 60s, we were in Brooklyn, and two quick stories. One is when we had an overflow on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, the church door to us allowed us to use their sanctuary. They were very nice. They covered over the statues of Jesus and the cross, and of course, there were a group of people. That's not where I'm praying. I got to be in the real deal.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be, because God didn't respond to the people that prayed in the church. I don't know if they knew that, the Jewish God. So that was interesting. And then the other thing was, my father was relatively, I think for the time, radical. He invited. There were a community of African American Jews that lived in Brooklyn. I didn't know that. Even today, it sounds so foreign. He invited them over for Friday night, and not only did these people, of course, stand out. This is the 60s, right? The mid 60s. But of course, there was a group of people in the congregation that were and these are Jews. However they got to be Jews, they're Jews. But there was a group of people that were really didn't like it. So, this kind of things that we have to deal with is to get people to kind of open their minds and listen, not just with their ears, listen with their hearts and everything else.
Right. And not everything different has to be a threat, right? It can be an enhancer. It can be a clarifier of what is important to you. It can be it can shine light. But I think we're all in a societal fight or flight mode. I think we're all feeling under attack by viruses, political figures, and economic forces, and there's a lot of circling of the wagons going on, and I don't think that's good for humanity.
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit. I'm sure we all have. Like just for example, the last 4 years with the huge, conflict between Democrat, Republican, Trump, anti-Trump, blah blah blah, and it coalesced into a January 6th, which was a nightmare. And when you look back at the last 10 or 20 years, my belief is that, you know, politicians, they would focus on the East Coast and the West Coast, and everything in between was called flyover country. They didn't have to stop there. Guess what? Those people were ignored. I am not defending them. I think what happened January 6th, I hope those people go to jail, pay a huge price, no problem. But when you look at the cause, what is the cause? Because it didn't happen out of the blue. Donald Trump didn't come out of nowhere and just say, this is who we're going to be. He tapped into something. What did he tap into? He tapped into a group of people that were ignored.
Yeah.
You know, we did well on the East Coast. We did well on the West Coast, whether it was financially, technology, you name it, they did well. And when the politics went after that. So you ignore a group of people for 10, 20, 30 years, and they look to the left and they look to the right, meaning look East Coast, look West Coast, and go, and look how well they're doing. Those people got angry.
Yeah.
So, and they got left behind. So I think that to me was part of the process of when, Donald Trump just, touched that nerve and got those people to unfortunately go even more right wing. Anyways, any thoughts on that? I don't want to stay too much on that topic, but any thoughts on that?
I think if we expand what you're talking about out of just the political conversation into a broader conversation about human interaction, when people are ignored or spoken down to, or convinced that others see them as ignoramuses, they're either going to believe it and live down to the expectations, or they're going to fight like hell to counteract that impression, right? I'm a proponent of a wonderful aphorism. I think his name was Professor Alexander Kay. I may be misstating that. He's a professor of Jewish studies at Brandeis. He's of British origin. And he says, what he tries to teach his students, whatever article they're reading, whatever text they're reading, no matter what historical or cultural milieu it's emerging from, try to read it from the stance that the author is neither a moron nor a monster. Because our instincts are, if we're reading something that we don't agree with, or that or that offends us, we're going to assume that it's because the person's either uneducated or unredeemable or irredeemable, when it might just be that they're a human being with a different education, different background, different life story, and they come to a different opinion than you do about something. So can you be ennobled by the possibility that this person might have something to teach you, not to convert you, not to pick you up in the middle of the night from where you are and move you somewhere against your will, but to allow yourself to be open to another possibility. And I think that we too often assume that the other in a ideological or religious or political battle is a moron or a monster. Some are, but most are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've taught several classes on the art of listening.
Mm.
And the way you get better at something is by teaching it. And the reason I got tuned into that, and so I'm a very big proponent of listening and trying to improve my skill set, and when offered the opportunity to teach about it, to teach about listening and why that's so important. Because in pretty much, all the classes now are about, oh, you're going to do a public speech. Oh, get over your fear of talking. Oh, this is how you organize the public. Oh, enunciate here. Don't do it here. You want to convince them. You want to sell them, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Very, very few classes on listening. And how did I get interested in it? Because there's a group of people, a nonprofit called Compassionate Listening Project up in Seattle, somewhere up there. I'm from New York, so it's up in the left corner.
It's past Lexington.
Oh, for sure. Exactly. So, and what do is they train people they have trainers that go out to different hotspots around the world. Israel and the West Bank, back in the day, the Bosnia, area. And they'll take groups of people from both sides of the conflict and bring them into a room. And they'll train them and set up some kind of, I don't want to use the word rules or guidelines. And then I'll be paired off with someone from the West Bank, the other side, and I'll listen to their story. And my brother was shot, my mother was tortured, my house was this, whatever the story is. I just listen. And then they'll listen to my story. I'm simplifying it. And then over the course of a weekend, it's actually very quick. They quickly realize a few things. One is they're just like me. That's me. That's my. And the other is a lot of these people, of course, now have become strong, very close bonds, friends for 10, 20 years now,
Mm.
because they have this realization. Whereas beforehand, it was, look what you did to look what your people did to, et cetera, et cetera. So so moved by that that's kind of, I love that. And I think that can change the world when you're not listening. Well, the other thing is when you're not listening, well, what are you doing?
Yeah,
Well, I'm forming opinions.
correct.
I'm judging. I agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think So I can't really, it's an illusion to say we can multitask. We use that word all the time, but that's an illusion. I can either focus on you and give you my full attention, or I can go over here and do something else, and that's okay. But trying to do both means I'm not really going to catch everything you're saying. I know I'm not. I'll get the gist of it, but I got this going on here. And what we have found is that when I focus and observe and listen 100% what you're saying, the facts that you're giving me, the meaning, your energy, all of these things, I'm actually in the moment.
Right, as opposed to forming the retort already before you're having finished your comment, which I'm sure actually both of us are doing in this moment, because there's no way to have a conversation without doing it on some level. But I also, was it Marshall Rosenberg in Nonviolent Communication? What is
Right,
it?
exactly.
To really be nonviolent, not in a violent exchange, but even a conversation. How do you be nonviolent vis-a-vis the other person's right and ability to share their full idea, and how what it feels like to be fully heard and validated. Sometimes even in our staff, and we get along. We're not at each other's throats, but sometimes we add exercises to our conversations to make sure that everyone is listening and not just like bubbling up with what they're going to say in response. You don't start speaking response until the person who's speaking says the words "dibarti," I've spoken,
Right.
and someone says out loud "shamati," I have heard. It's like a little palate cleanser. It's an amuse bouche, right? Okay, now we can move on to the next thing rather than immediately responding. Um, I did a training in a methodology called bibliodrama. It was created by a wonderful guy named Peter Pizzoli, who basically took psychodrama and applied it to biblical study. And it's really a fascinating way of doing in real time. We'd call it midrash in Hebrew, in real time explication and deepening of the text. And the idea is that, let's say we're talking about a particular biblical scene, I don't know, the binding of Isaac. Instead of saying, what do you think was Abraham's motivation when he said yes to this crazy request? It's this: you are Abraham. You're standing at the altar. You have a knife in your hand. What are you thinking in this moment? And the bibliodramatic technique, the person has to respond in the first person, not, well, I think Abraham would say, I am wondering how I got here. I'm looking at my son's face and he's frightened. And whatever comes to you at the moment. But the key second part is that the director of the bibliodrama, when I run it, has to echo each actor in the scene also in the first person, not in the second person. So if we were doing this bibliodrama and I had said, as Abraham, I don't know how I got here, and I see the fear in my son's face, and you were the director, you would say back to me in the first person, I'm Abraham. I don't know how I got here. So that I can hear myself.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds small. It is so validating to have someone prove to you that they really were listening, and you get to actually experience your own contributions through another person's voice, right? This idea that in a class, people will remember much more what they said than what someone else said, right? And how often our systems are set up to like tamp down people's contributions and not hear them rather than lift them up. And I agree with you. I do think it can change the world. I think it can change a moment, and I think it can change the world. Is it going to change the world? I don't know. I don't know if I'm.
Of course it is. Of course it is. So it kind of brings us a little bit full circle, because it's very difficult for me and for people to listen to things that initially they don't agree with. So I'm going to interrupt because I don't agree with that. I know someone. I know someone that the moment I start speaking, she's already formed an opinion on what I'm going to say.
Man,
And it's very difficult for me to speak at that point.
correct.
So how can I do that? How can I listen, be present, not watch my blood pressure go up and all this other stuff when initially, now at the end of the conversation, I still may not agree with you,
Right.
but let me at least listen because at least I'll understand. And that brings why does it bring us full circle is because the only way that I know how to do that as is to use meditation as a basis.
Mm.
Because through meditation, as you know, we get the opportunity for our mind to slow down, for the stories and the opinions and the judgments to slow down. Sometimes they'll actually fade away.
Mm.
So it's almost like building a muscle. You know, if I want to lift 50 pounds, I have to start with the 2 pound pink weights,
Mm.
and then I can build my way up to 50. And the same thing, if I want to be able to be a good listener, then by meditating, I'll have enough patience and calmness and confidence to listen. So
Right, because in that meditative experience, you're also listening to yourself in a way that we normally don't listen to, right? You're listening to what bubbles up, and you talk about curiosity. One of my methods that I have, I'm not saying that I created it, but that I've adapted and developed from many different teachers, is when something comes into my mind while I'm meditating, rather than reject it or be angry that it's intruding upon the clear space, is what if you take purely a stance of curiosity about it, like, oh, look what look what's in my mind right now. I just look at it. Just look at the thought. Particularly because if you think about the Buddhist approach to ephemerality, it'll be gone in a moment. Like you think, like right now it's dominating your consciousness, but it's like a helium balloon. You'll let go of it, it'll disappear, and something else will come in. So while it's there, just oh. And I try to talk to my children about that, particularly when they're having like hard days, right, or a crisis, and the Western notion is solve it, figure it out, get past it. Um, and I say to them, what if you just step aside yourself and just look, not with fear, not with worry, just with curiosity at this moment, curiosity at this emotional state. It won't solve everything, but just try it. Just instead of being panicked, just look at it, hold it for the moment, and see if simply by holding it, something develops. One of my teachers at the Holy Isle, a woman by the name of Sue Weston, she was the primary teacher of meditation and qigong. She had us do this exercise where we imagined we were holding in our right hand our chi, right, our life force, right. And the first time she described this to me, it's like, what? I'm not. How do I hold my chi? What are you talking about, lady? And then I started to do it. I started to hold my chi in my hand. I know that the camera doesn't show it, like by my right hip. And we're supposed to observe it, observe ourselves holding our life force. And then she said, while you're observing it, just try to, with your hand, I'll do it a little bit higher than it would have been, just move it from the right side of your body, almost like Grover, to your left side of your body. And just watch your own life force being moved by you. And after a certain point, it became a magnificent experience because I was just curious at the entirety of my life force sitting in my hand, both beyond me, apart from me, and intrinsically of me, and also being controlled by me. And without a willingness to be slow and curious, you would never let that experience happen. And I think I told you in a previous conversation that when I pray now, and I still pray in a Jewish form, I'm very Jewy. There's a lot of body posture in prayer, right? You know, bow and and bend your knees, and Jews often like shuckle back and
mm-hmm.
forth. So I still do that, and I also, for when I pray the primary Jewish prayer, I have my right hand by my right side holding my chi,
Mm-hmm.
as I've been taught by my Tibetan Buddhist teacher. She's not herself Tibetan, but that's the Buddhism that she practices. And in my left hand, I'm holding my fingers in the position that my yoga teacher and Hindu teacher in India taught me. And some might look at that and say, that is the epitome of blasphemy. That is the epitome of letting other traditions invade Judaism. And to me, I experience it as extraordinary fusion that enriches my Jewish practice rather than takes away from it.
Yeah, brings you closer to your Judaism, which is a beautiful thing. In Buddhism, getting back to how you're training your children, in Buddhism, we're all about leaning in to whatever we're experiencing now, as opposed to, you have stress, something went wrong. You're right. What's the mentality, especially with men? Fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Fix it and move on.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you fix it too quick and maybe not, fix it right. You miss out on what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, which is usually stress, irritation, annoyance, fear, whatever words we want to use. And if we want to experience less of that, then we need to understand that those feelings are ephemeral,
Mm-hmm.
and they're really an illusion. The only way to do that is by looking at it and touching it and feeling it, and then it starts to fade. The problem you're dealing with hasn't gone away, but now you can deal with it without all this other baggage.
Right.
And that's, once again, I'm a big proponent of meditation. That's, again, where meditation comes in, because that gives you the muscles, to the confidence and the ability and the patience and the courage to look at your fear and what you're feeling and experiencing. And then there's other techniques as well, which we don't have to get into. But that I enjoy the fact that you share that with your children.
That ephemerality is one of the most lasting, small but giant pieces of wisdom that I learned from my immersion within the Buddhist experience. Because on the one hand, reality, and certainly a Jewish focus on reality, is a now religion. Like, what is this moment? What is possible in this moment? And how do I make this moment special? How do I make this moment sacred? Judaism is, for the most part, not a world to come religion. It's a this moment can be holy.
Sure.
The the line that the world is divided between the holy and the not yet holy, right? So my job is to make this holy as quick as possible.
Right.
On the other hand, whatever this moment is, it won't be very soon, whether it's good or not good, right? And whatever feeling we have right now, however real we feel it, very soon we'll have a different feeling. And the notion of letting go of that, which I just learned how to do better on the Holy Isle, has been enormously helpful. And it helped me, talk about a coincidence. A year after, about 6 months after I came back from the whole sabbatical, so almost a year after the sabbatical began, and I had that retreat, I was in a terrible biking accident. I'm a biker. I bike, I try to bike about 100 miles a week minimum, and I was a very bad biking accident. And it could have been much, much worse, but basically I had a bike malfunction and the seat broke off my bike while I was biking it, and I flew into a pole, right? I had impact right here. Had I had impact here, I'm gone, right? So thank God my shoulder took the brunt, but it took an enormous brunt. Okay. So after the surgery, which was horrific, and the immediate recovery from the surgery, I had tremendous pain. First, I had tremendous pain in the area, much more than the orthopedists suggested I should. Plus, my whole body was experiencing this weird buzzing, humming discomfort that came out of nowhere. It was driving me insane. I remember saying, I'm not suicidal. I'm not going to end my life, but I can't live this way, right? Like, I'm not about to go do any harm to myself, but this existence is not tenable. I started thinking about ephemerality, and I started thinking about pain, and I started thinking about suffering being related to want, right? That Buddhist notion of I want A, but I have B, and the gap between those two things is all suffering. Yeah, I do want B, but I have A. That's what I have, right? And I started thinking about you were saying before that we can't really multitask. We can't really do two things at the same time. I was thinking, you can't think two thoughts at the same time. You also can't really feel two pains at the same time, right? If I pinch you on the shoulder and then a second later punch you on the other shoulder, when I punch you on the other shoulder harder, you're not going to be feeling the pinch. It's not that you're going to feel this more. You literally can't feel both. So then I thought, what if I add those two things together? If I replace a pain with a thought, will I have accomplished something? Or if I think of the pain, if it's not related to an immediate proximate source, like someone stabs you in the arm, you're going to feel it for a reason. But if my body is giving me a pain signal, but there doesn't seem to be anything directly wrong, What if I look at that pain with a curiosity, with the premise that it is ephemeral, that it'll disappear, and that the next thing that comes into my mind will not be a pain burst, but an idea burst. I can start having a certain amount of control over my pain. It was transformative for me, so much so that I almost don't trust myself when I actually do feel a pain, and do I need to actually investigate it? Because I say to myself, well, maybe that pain is just a neural burst, and I can replace it with a thought. So I've almost overtrained myself in that. But these methodologies that stem from a religious and cultural tradition can be extremely significant as we navigate all sorts of vicissitudes in life, whether bike accidents or hard days or everything in between.
So that's a very inspiring story. Pain is one of the most difficult experiences. You know, I broke up with my boyfriend, my girlfriend, whatever. Okay, that's kind of a little bit doable. I don't want to minimize that, but pain, once you're, between a scale of 1 to 10, between 5 and 10, very difficult. And of course, we have Western medicine, which is wonderful. And the approach that you used is also wonderful. And when I teach students methods like that, I usually have them, because I want our viewers to know, yeah, if you can do that, great, but usually start small. You didn't have the opportunity to start small. You started with, I'm at an 8, 9, and 10, but I don't have an option. So, but it's good to practice that with the small stuff, which is, you bump your knee or a little bit more serious than that. And you can just start to, really breathe, come into the moment, that kind of thing, or replace it with a thought, other thoughts as well.
Sorry to interrupt,
Go ahead.
but I started with an itch. I started thinking about the notion of an itch, right? The urge to scratch an itch is as profound as the urge to breathe when you've been holding your breath. You can't not scratch it unless you don't scratch it, right? So I started to think, if I go past that moment where I have to breathe, right, then I'm going to die. But if I go past the moment where I have to scratch the itch, will I still be feeling this itch in 20 seconds? How about 60 seconds? 2 minutes? On the one hand, there's no need to just like constantly test yourself. Sometimes you have an itch, you might as well scratch it. But training yourself to transcend this moment's feeling is just a good instinct, a good muscle to train in general.
Yeah. And when you look at some of the great meditators, the great Buddhists, great Christian saints, great Jews, they have pain. They feel pain. But you talk to them and it's just like, yeah, of course, I do feel that, but they don't let it overcome their being.
Yes.
And the Buddha talks about the 2 arrows. The first arrow is, oh, I got hit with an arrow. And the second arrow is, who did that to me? Where is he? I got it. It's like just adding more and more suffering to it. But and it's just not. And what you're suggesting, which is so inspiring, because it's not easy, especially when you get to that pain level. But it's worth practicing that. My Buddhist teacher says to me and others, the past is history, the future is mystery, the present moment is a gift. There's an example right there. It's also, or when I'm listening to you and I'm really listening, I am ennobled, I am inspired, and I don't have anything else going on. So it's truly a gift. It's very liberating in that regard, because the only thing that can make you happy is your state of mind. It's the only thing you have control over, really. We think we have control over so much else, but we don't. So when I can be in that moment and not be here, there, and everywhere else, or, oh my God, that pain is horrible. Oh my God, what am I going to do about it? It's really very liberating.
Yeah.
So that's a wonderful story. I want to ask you a question about Hasidut.
Yes.
So after your sabbatical, you wrote about your experience, and you basically said, Hasidut, which stresses the innate ability of every individual to achieve closeness to God through intense prayer and other ritual activities. So how do you teach or show that to your congregants or your students? In that same article, you wrote, it says 2 questions. You're the only direct tool you have to make an impact on the world. The Buddhist nun knows that, the Hasidic Rebbe knows that, the Hindu yogi knows that. I certainly know that know that more than I ever did before.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I'll start with the first one. First of all, it's always moving to have oneself be quoted to oneself, particularly things that one wrote years ago. I haven't read that in years. As I said earlier in the interview, in the conversation, though I was not brought up in a meditative mindfulness Judaism, I was definitely brought up in a ruach, spirit, energy, whirling dervish, like sweaty Judaism, like camp Judaism and campfire Judaism and banging on the table Judaism and glee Judaism and ecstasy Judaism, right? And I think that happens in youth group and it happens at camp, and it has been considered forbidden in synagogues, in the American Jewish cathedral, right, for decades, right? The American Jewish cathedral, I'm using that term intentionally, in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s was dead of that. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a scion of a Hasidic dynasty, but embraced a more progressive Judaism, excoriated the conservative rabbin in the 1950s or 60s, basically saying, you have all done an extraordinary job of ensuring that no one will walk into your sanctuaries and experience anything new or exciting. Well done. Like you've done it. You've got a perfect decorum and everything will be exactly as expected and no one will be inspired or threatened by inspiration, right? And he was being, very, very, intentionally sarcastic and biting. I was brought up actually in a smaller synagogue than that. In fact, when my parents moved to the part of Connecticut that we live in now, eventually next door to your sister, we didn't join the synagogue that was closest to us, which was one of those cathedral synagogues where certainly children shouldn't be childrening in the room. We joined a smaller, we would call it like Hamish, informal, down-to-earth synagogue where you could breathe a little bit. It wasn't Hasidic, but it was informed by a certain informality and a certain sense that the unexpected could happen. And I think a lot of modern Judaism is buttoned up and dressed down and staid. What Hasidut, what the original Hasidic revolution was in Eastern Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, was to explode Judaism out of its slumber, still within the forms of, it's anachronistic to call it orthodoxy, you didn't have that word, but still within the forms of traditional Judaism, but to be woken up from sleep, right? The classic Hasidic story of the kid who's illiterate or doesn't know the alphabet and is sent off by the community because doesn't know how to pray the prayers and is found in the forest just saying the letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and the Hasidic Rebbe say God will string them together into the prayers, right? Of course, right? Someone who can't read as fluidly is somehow less spiritually primed. So what I've tried to do, without trying to convert our synagogue into Hasidic Judaism, the same way I'm not trying to convert our synagogue into being Buddhist either, is to say, can we learn something about how they try to wake up the tradition and apply it within our structure, our idiom, our form, right? So, for instance, we have a service on Friday night called Sovev. Sovev means literally circle, in the round. It's a quote from the Kabbalah describing God as Sovev Kol Alma, God who encircles the entire world. And we did a very, very simple but very important thing. We did not do this in the big sanctuary. We did it in a room that could be set up in a modular way, and we set up people sitting in concentric circles, rather than a lectern up front and people sitting like an audience. And when you're sitting in concentric circles, and there are 4 people, and then 8 people, and 12 people, and all the sounds going to one place, and no one's leading, you're just all joining a spiritual experience. It's neo-Hasidic, right? It's a version of what the Baal Shem Tov was doing in the Ukraine and Poland in the 17th century. He said, get out of your sanctuaries and come into the fields and meet God there, right? It's a version of what the Kabbalists were doing in Tzfat in northern Israel in the 16th and 17th century when they invented this service called Kabbalat Shabbat, to receive the Sabbath with ecstasy rather than just the formal prayers. Not jettisoning our progressivism or our egalitarianism or our openness to all the parts of the modern life, but trying to re-embrace an elasticity, a body elasticity, and a soul elasticity into our religious experience. And some people find it very moving, and some people would rather just stand still and pray the prayers. And I have no rancor for them either, because we all are moved by different forces that are bigger than any one community can define.
Yeah, I think it's different motivations. We're motivated differently, and different boats. Our boat gets floated differently. What's interesting to me is when you are in that sovev, that type of configuration, you're really working off of a group energy. Mm-hmm. It's very hard, I think, to do that kind of feeling, to get that kind of inspiration by yourself. People do it, of course, but just like meditation. Sure, I meditate every day by myself, but when I'm in a group, it feels differently. And here you're creating some kind of increased, there's a synergy. You have 12 people, but the energy could be 10,000 people.
Correct.
So that's a beautiful thing. So I see that Saturday mornings, Temple Beth Am offers a service called Meditation Plus. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, it actually totally predates my own journey into this. So I've been working at the synagogue for 12 years. And for at least that amount of time, we're blessed to be a big community with a large staff. And we also have lots of rabbis who are members of the community, even though they don't work for the community. They work for a local college, or they work for a Jewish day school, like the Jewish Federation. And one of them is a rabbi named the Rabbi Ruth Sohn, who's a Reform trained rabbi who lives in the community, who also is very involved in the meditative world. And since before I got here, in addition to the quote unquote standard and traditional Sabbath morning services, she offered, we call it a service. It's really an experience. It doesn't follow the liturgical lineup of a Shabbat service, but it meets in one room, and it's a combination of three things: meditation, song or nigun, right? So nigun is the Hebrew word for a tune without word, just music, and study, right? Study of that week's parsha, that week's Torah reading. And it's about an hour and a quarter, and it has a group of devotees. We call them a group of Hasidim. They're like, they follow her. And what's been lovely is that I was proud to host it in my community for the first 7 or 8 years that I was here, but it wasn't my thing. And now I could be a guest leader of that service, because I've got the skill set, I've got the prop.
But you don't play guitar, though. Do you play guitar? I don't recall.
Too soon.
Okay.
So that's one of the things we offer every week. And in addition to that, we bring in that kind of meditation and tunefulness into our other services as well. So our traditional Shabbat morning service, I'm proud to say, it doesn't look anything like what it used to look like. And in addition to that, we've offered up other offerings that are specifically focused on mindfulness and meditation.
It's a beautiful way to not to introduce, but a beautiful way to practice Judaism. Yeah. Because it's really, energy based. So many great things. There's musicality, which really moves us, in a very strong, meaningful way. You bring in meditation in there, which really helps people focus and concentrate, as opposed to just show up. We're going to do these 17 prayers and then we're done.
First time I did a meditation at the end of a sermon, I think people were like, "Am I in the right place? What's going on here?" I was soon back from my sabbatical, and I was giving a sermon, teaching an idea, and at the end of it, instead of like ending it with like the last paragraph, I ended it in a meditation, because I wanted it to like to saturate differently. And people were weirded out by it. Also, it's because like there's a certain covenant, a certain agreement that people have as to what they're going to experience. And sometimes you owe them the explanation that they're about to experience something very different. And normally sermons at Temple Beth Am do not end with meditations. But now occasionally my community expects that when they don't expect it, right. I'm gonna in the middle of a class ask them to close their eyes.
Right.
I have a line that they joke back to me, and I love it. I love the joking. But I say, if you're into meditation, what we're about to do is a meditation. If you're not into meditation, we're not going to meditate right now. Okay? Close your eyes, right? Like don't be afraid. If you don't want to think of it as meditation, capital M, fine. But just listen to my voice.
Right. Yeah. Well, call it something else. That's a good one. So I also listened to, you had a midweek meditation. I saw it on Facebook. And you talked a little bit about the George Floyd case, which had just finished, and I enjoyed listening about the Omer, and of course the meditation itself. And what was the most inspiring to me was at the end, you recited a prayer from Buddhism called the Four Immeasurables,
Yes.
which is may all beings be happy, and may all beings have happiness in the cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings rejoice in the well-being of others, and may all beings live free from greed and hatred. Got it. So, so that was just amazing that you brought that in there, and of course on the slide I think you had a Buddhist prayer, so you gave credit, which was fine. Whether you did or not is not the point. How do folks take to that kind of thing? I think they would have taken to it better if you didn't have a Buddhist prayer.
Yeah.
You say, I wrote this up one night and I want to present it to you guys.
I so appreciate the question. I appreciate that you listen to that meditation. There's a Talmudic notion that you bring the redemption when you quote someone. When you quote something in the name of the person who wrote it, it helps bring redemption. When you quote something b'shem omro, in the person's name. So you're supposed to, in the Jewish tradition, just, it's not just that you're not plagiarizing, it's you're giving honor to the source, right? So I always do that if I know that I'm taking it from another tradition, right? This is another thing that was gifted to me by Sue Weston in this retreat. We would end our meditations that I think the version I have is a slight different version than when you recited. The first two are similar, the second two are a little bit different.
Right. Mine are the correct way, by the way.
Of course. Yeah, we're the breakout minion. We're the side minion. Right. So how do people respond to it? It's interesting because I haven't actually described it in a while. I described it when I first came back and started using it, and then you don't want to like introduce it every single time you use it. You want it to be a part of the rhythm. And sometimes there are people who are joining the meditation who haven't joined before and haven't heard my description of what it is. And interestingly, the part that they are most irked by, if they're irked, is not the fact that I have borrowed it from a Buddhist prayer, because one of the things that is clear in that prayer is, and you would know a billion times better than I, is clear about Buddhism itself. It's not really a divinity-based notion. So it's not, there should be no threat to the Jewish God concept to bring in a Buddhist prayer. And even those words are like scream ecumenicism, right?
Right.
If they're bothered by anything, there's one line, and the fourth one, that the way I learned it was neither overburdened by, I wish I could find it, because it's worth talking about. One second. Here. So the last one, the way I learned it is, and may we live in great equanimity, free from burdening attachment to loved ones and contempt for others. Right. That free from burdening attachment to loved ones is a hard one for Jews, because what I understand it to mean is, it's okay to have attachment to loved ones, but it's your burdening attachment to loved ones that add conflict, that make you not separate, that it doesn't give you any distance, that turns love into suffering, right? So not only do you want to be free from contempt from everyone, but even the ones whom you love, you should try to spare yourself and them from the type of love that is enmeshed and becomes burdensome. Mm-hmm. That takes unpacking, right? Because people are used to being very burdened in
totally.
But the fact that I bring it from an outside tradition, that they've just gotten used to that in me.
Yeah. So those 4 lines. The first line that refers to the Buddhist concept of compassion. The second line refers to which we don't have to explain, but basically we want people to be happy. The second line, which talks about suffering, has to do with the Buddhist concept of loving kindness. Another way to define that, doesn't really need to be defined, is friendliness, that kind of thing. The third line has to do with joy for others. Oh, I'm so happy that you got that. I'm so as opposed to, oh, I can't believe he got it and I don't get it. So happiness for other people's joy. And then the fourth line, the one we're discussing now, is about equanimity, which is not to have too strong a preferences. I like chocolate ice cream. You're giving me vanilla. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Or the attitude or the situation you talked about loved ones. It's kind of to have a grandparent attitude they call it. I don't know how they say it in Tibetan, which is, when the baby's crying and the mother's got to come over and it's the fussy and all that, and you're the grandparent, you want everything to be okay, but you don't really have to get emotionally involved in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And
equanimity.
that, I think that ends up being wise in when I think about leadership, right? I work a lot with my staff on how to be a differentiated leader, which does not mean not to be a caring leader, but how do you differentiate yourself from the overwhelming emotions of a particular encounter and what someone is projecting upon you, right? Can you distance yourself a little bit so that you're connected, you're caring, but you're not burdened on the level that the other person wants to burden you with. You're a little bit dispassionate, right? And you know that this moment's going to end soon, so that's the ephemerality. And you don't want to suffer, so even though you wish that this encounter weren't happening, it is okay. So embrace it, and can you be a little bit detached? It helps. I think, makes you be a more effective leader, in addition to being a person living with more general equanimity.
Yeah, and you're still going to do what needs to be done, as
Yeah.
will they, but you don't have to, like you said, the word burden, really. So change topics a little bit. So in 1991, Nathan Katz was a professor of religious studies at the University of South Florida. I didn't know that. My research showed me that. And he wrote an article in the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs of what happened when a Jewish delegation of rabbis met with the Dalai Lama
Mm-hmm.
in his home in Dharamsala in 1989. And I think Professor Katz led the delegation. And there were a couple of interesting aspects I wanted to get you may know already, but get your take on it. So he wanted to understand the Jewish experience for surviving exile, right? He escaped from China, as did hundreds of thousands of Tibetans. Millions were killed. And given his own experience, he was concerned, obviously, with how are we going to keep this together here. And the Jews certainly figured that out. And one participant summed it up with, in response to that question, said, "Well, the Jewish family kept the covenant and the Torah alive." Dr. Greenberg, one of the delegates. The major celebrations in Jewish life, including the Sabbath, sitting Shiva, the 7-day mourning period, are observed in the home, she said, rather than the synagogue. That, no doubt, is one of our secrets. I found that fascinating because I never looked at it that way. What are your thoughts on that?
Those two comments bring us back a little bit to that image of the sheet and the perforations. There is something about specificity in love and worship and community that allows it to be perpetuated. In fact, when I in a self-flagellating mode, I say I don't have a chance at being optimistic that my great grandchildren will embrace Judaism at the level that I do, because I'm not sufficiently specific or committed or orthodox, right? Like if you're just looking at successful propagation of the seed and the idea into the next generation, the ones who are more absolutist about things and more specific, they're just they have the odds in their favor of any religious expression, unfortunately, because I think that the greatest wisdom is in the evolving and progressive forms of religious life. But in terms of raw numbers,
Yeah.
I know I can't pound the pulpit on nuance and on mixtures of ideas. It would be much more effective if I were more focused on my own specific way, right? And I think that to the extent that I do organize my life around those very specific home-based and synagogue-based observances, that's the best chance that I have and we have of waking up in 100 years and there being people who are living according to the tradition that we find significant. And there are parts of my brain that really want that. And there are also parts of my brain that say, okay, if it doesn't happen, first of all, I won't be around to know it. And maybe the world is bigger than the conservative Jewish movement anyway. But I think it's Rabbi Irving Greenberg who said that line, and he also happened to write several books on the Jewish holidays, so he loves this stuff. I think he is right that we perpetuate families by having specific rituals and gatherings, just this group, and I think we perpetuate nations and cultures in that way as well. I've always been amazed in a bit of awe at the Persian Jewish community. So the Persian Jewish community that started to come over in the 1960s and 70s have just done a much better job of other non-American, other cultural Jewish communities in the United States of passing down language and specific Persian Jewish observances to now the third generation. So there were very few Jews who still spoke or understood Yiddish 60 years after the wave of immigration came in the 1890s, 1910s, right? It became very niche and, was studied in the academy unless you were a Chassid. The Persian Jews who are being born today are I don't know if they're going to go up reading it, but they're going to understand Persian because their parents understand Persian from their parents, who learned from their parents. And that adds a certain level of glue, and glue keeps things together. And at the same time, the other things that we've been talking about through this conversation is that melting and melding and being exposed to others and allowing your own truth and your own story to be enriched by other influences is also a beautiful part of what it means to be a spiritual seeker. So, I'm very tevye on this. On the one hand, on the other hand, I think we ought to double down on our specific modes of doing the inherited family and religious traditions we have. Other hand, I think we should be as open as possible to other people enlightening us and inspiring us and enriching our own practices. I forgot this. Remind me of the second quote that you had.
The second quote had to do with the Jewish family. The first quote was it was really about the Jewish family. That was her answer, was that the Jewish family kept the Torah alive.
Yeah.
So the other salient point from that meeting between the Dalai Lama and this group of rabbis was they raised the issue that Judaism loses its best and its brightest to Buddhism. This is a conversation I had 32 years ago. Don't know if that's still true today. And the Dalai Lama was like shocked by it. The Buddhists, like Jews, we do not seek converts. Anyone who wants the teachings of the Buddha is entitled to them. And he said, his answer was, if you want to keep your people in your religion, then you must open your doors to spirituality. If you have an esoteric tradition to offer them, because he felt that that's what was bringing the Jews over to Buddhism, was this esoteric tradition. If you have that tradition, which of course we do as Jews, then they will not want to leave.
Yes.
So, and then there was one of the Dalai Lama's students, Lama Yeshe, had many Jewish students, and he said, if what they learn from me helps to make them better Jews, then I'm very happy. Then I will have served my purpose as a religious teacher. So I found that was an interesting quote that I found as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
There's a long form story joke that I'll convert into short form about a woman who spends an enormous amount of time trying to reach the top of a mountain in Tibet to be able to speak to this very, very important mystic up there. Okay. I think you know where this is going. And she has to pull all these strings, and she spends her inheritance, and she climbs up, and she finally gets exposure to this one mystic that no one has exposure to her. And she finally has her moment, and she's allowed one sentence. And what does she say to this mystic? Sheldon, come home. Right? So that emerges from a real phenomenon where some members of the Jewish community, I don't know if it's the best and the brightest, I don't know what that phrase means, but certainly more than a few were recognizing in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, particularly because of some of the cultural convulsions that were happening in the United States, that the Hasidim of the 17th century had some things right, had a lot of things wrong, but had some things right, and the Judaism that they were being brought up in was dried out and desiccated and brittle and too much focused on what you can and cannot do rather than what was possible in a spiritual life. And they went seeking. And the Dalai Lama was right, if I may be so bold to say that it was wonderful that they sought it out in Buddhism, but they could have sought it out in Judaism. I weren't doing a good enough job of making it available, of setting the table with the best stuff that the Jewish tradition has to offer, which is this fusion of ritual practice and holiday observance and some kind of spiritual wakefulness and ecstasy. So some of them found it in Buddhism and stayed. Some of them found it in Buddhism and brought it back.
Right.
In fact, there is the whole joke about every Jew, if you're deserted on a desert island, you need two synagogues. You need the one that you go to and the one you wouldn't step foot in, right? So Judaism
Right.
needs, movement after movement. So the newest movement on some level is renewal Judaism, which is sort of neo-Hasidism, and it's very much infused by Eastern forms. One of my dearest friends in the world is Rabbi David Ingber, who grew up as an Orthodox Jew, then became a totally secular Jew and was a waiter in Tel Aviv for many years, and then became an acolyte of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shlomi, who himself was brought up as a Hasidic Lubavitch Hasid, who then founded a new way of doing Judaism called renewal Judaism, which is this tremendous fusion, very traditional, very familiar, very Hamish, very old world, and also very open to the very kinds of things that people were leaving Judaism to find, and they said, find it with us. And he's very successful. He comes by it honestly, like he knows the Jewish tradition back and forth. I mean, he's not. There's nothing faux about it. It's very rigorous and substantive, but it's also infused by a lot of those forms, including nigun, right, song and meditation and yoga, and being a little bit okay with being transgressive, right? How can you be transgressive in a holy mode? And for a lot of Jewish history, the rabbis would say, no, if you're being transgressive, you're transgressing. But there might be a way of actually making holy certain transgressive instincts. And that's what you get in renewal Judaism. And I'm not a renewal Jew. I'm a conservative rabbi, but I'm very inspired by that approach. And I try to, one could call some of our Shabbat services like our Sovev service, and I have another service called Hama'alot, which is a Sabbath morning version of that service, very intentional, very crafted. We craft it in such a way that when it's over, people are dying for more. Don't let the service be over yet. And what we want, that's what we want them to experience, where every minute is curated for them. You could very much call that a renewal service, the way we've crafted it.
Wow, that's amazing. So, my background, and we'll wind it up here in the next few minutes, my background was 12 years in an Orthodox yeshiva. And so I actually disagree with the Dalai Lama, but maybe he's not listening.
Maybe he is.
Maybe he is. So, because the reason that I left, because I've looked at this for 40 plus years now that as a Buddhist, was because the teachers that I had were dogmatic and in many cases mean, because they were old school. They weren't from this country and they didn't really understand children. And I think anyone, and not really open-minded. And I think a teacher who is not open-minded or not kind should not be in education. And that was my experience, and that's why I went the direction that I went in. So I would maintain that those are the two most important, features of education, of life, of culture, of religion. And then whatever it is, you're going to keep your people. That's from my personal experience, but I'm sure the Dalai Lama's got a point as well. Okay, most important question probably of the podcast: Have you seen Shtisel?
I mourned when Shtisel was over. I sat Shiva for Shtisel, and I haven't fully recovered from the fact that it's probably not coming back. Loved it.
Yeah, amazing, right? What a great job. I mean, on one hand, of course, it's about ultra Orthodox, but on the other hand, it's not. It's about family. It's about people. Things we all experience, and
frailty, and vulnerability, and love, and fear. And my wife and I were wondering, would we have enjoyed it so much if it wasn't so close to us? Like, would I've enjoyed, I don't know, like a Malaysian version of Shtisel? And okay. No, because like I know him. I know them, even though I don't know them, and so it felt close enough.
So I've watched a number of interviews of the actors and actresses that, because when you're excited about something, you want more. You can't get more. Okay, let's see what's going on behind the scenes. And apparently it's extremely popular in a lot of the Arab countries. I forget the actor's name, but the guy that played the father, he was having lunch with his wife in Lebanon or somewhere. And I think it was France.
Yeah, and these probably not Lebanon.
Right, not Lebanon. Yeah, but these Lebanese women came over to him and they recognized him. And if you look at him in character and out of character, of course you could kind of figure it out, but it's not that obvious but they heard his voice. And they came over to him in a restaurant. They said, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry to bother you, but are you?" And of course he said yes. They had a wonderful conversation. So meaning that, when we're talking on a humanity level, yes, of course, my background's Jewish, so I appreciated it more. I speak Yiddish, I speak Hebrew. I really got into it, as did you. But that's not the key. The key was just how wonderful job they did, as you mentioned, showing people's frailties, their humaneness. So it didn't, and I love the fact that it touched all these other cultures
Yeah.
as well and had a positive impact. Anyways, thank you so much for taking the time to share with me and with everyone that's going to be watching this. It was really wonderful meeting you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
I do as well. Thanks for the invitation, and namaste and
Namaste.
shalom.
Okay,
And
stay safe.
I look forward to meeting you soon.
Stay safe.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed our talk with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the It's Not What You Think podcast. That really helps us to continue to produce these episodes and invite other guests from around the world.